The silence before the storm is always deafening. For years, the whispers swirled through tabloids, royal circles, and dinner tables around the world. Whispers that something about Meghan Markle's pregnancy with Archie just didn't seem right. The videos, the photos, the carefully curated interviews, they all painted a picture of perfection. But now, at 44, Meghan herself has broken that silence with words no one expected to hear. In a moment that stunned even her most loyal supporters, she confessed, "I lied for 6 years. Archie was born through surrogacy." Those 12 words detonated across the media landscape like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundation of the image she spent years building. The revelation didn't come from a tabloid exposé or a leaked document. It came straight from Meghan's own lips. A confession she said was long overdue. For those who followed her story, this wasn't just a headline. It was a full-circle moment, a collision between truth and illusion, a reckoning of everything the public believed about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The question now isn't whether the rumors were true. It's why she lied, and how deep that deception ran. From the beginning, Meghan Markle's rise to royalty was nothing short of cinematic. A divorced American actress walking into the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, charming a prince, and promising to redefine what it meant to be royal in the 21st century. Her story was a fairy tale, or at least it was sold as one. But every fairy tale hides a shadow. Every crown has its cracks. And in this case, those cracks began to show long before her confession. Back in 2018, the palace couldn't stop smiling. Prince Harry had found love, and the monarchy had found its modern face. Meghan was poised, articulate, and relatable. She symbolized inclusion and progress. The wedding was a spectacle of global unity. A gospel choir, a biracial bride, and a promise of a new beginning for a family haunted by the ghosts of Diana. But beneath the surface of that polished image, tension was brewing. Staff whispered about Meghan's temper, about her control over narratives, about her insistence on privacy mixed with an obsession for media control. Yet nothing, not even the alleged feuds with Kate or the rifts with palace aides, could compare to what came next: the pregnancy. The announcement came with fanfare. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are expecting their first child in the spring of 2019. The world erupted in joy. Headlines splashed her glowing photos across front pages. But soon after, questions began to emerge, questions that, at the time, were dismissed as cruel or conspiratorial. Why were the hospital details kept secret? Why were there no official photos of Meghan entering or leaving a maternity ward? Why did her baby bump seem to change shape so dramatically between appearances? Why did royal reporters get contradictory timelines about the due date? At first, these were dismissed as internet gossip, baseless chatter from corners of the web desperate for royal scandal. But over time, the inconsistencies became harder to ignore. Meghan's insistence on privacy clashed with her constant public appearances. Her team demanded that certain questions never be asked, that specific camera angles be avoided. And when reporters pressed for clarity, palace representatives either refused to comment or gave answers that contradicted each other. Even royal correspondents who had defended her began to wonder privately what was really going on behind closed doors. And then came the photos, hundreds of them, taken from every possible angle during public events. Each one became a point of obsession. Viewers slowed down footage, scrutinized every frame. Some claimed to see the bump deflate or shift unnaturally as Meghan bent down. Others pointed to moments where she appeared visibly uncomfortable, clutching her stomach with both hands in an almost performative way. For many, these observations meant nothing more than overanalyzed celebrity footage. For others, they were signs of something far bigger. Inside the palace, sources say the whispers reached a fever pitch. Senior aides reportedly urged Meghan to allow a more transparent process for the birth: traditional photographs, an official medical announcement, and a clear hospital record. But Meghan refused. "This is our private moment," she allegedly told a member of the staff. "I'll decide what the public gets to see." It was an unusual stance for a royal, especially when royal births had always been handled with meticulous transparency. From Princess Diana to Kate Middleton, every royal mother followed protocol. The secrecy surrounding Meghan's pregnancy was unprecedented. When Archie's birth was announced in May 2019, the palace issued a brief statement that left more questions than answers. No one saw Meghan enter a hospital. No one witnessed her leave. Hours later, Prince Harry appeared beaming in front of cameras, speaking vaguely about the amazing experience of childbirth. Yet when pressed for details, he avoided naming the hospital or medical staff involved. It wasn't just secrecy, it was erasure. The official records later listed a London hospital, but no one at that facility confirmed her stay. It was as if the royal baby had appeared out of thin air. Theories spread rapidly, some cruel, some compassionate. Was Meghan struggling with fertility? Had she used a surrogate for medical reasons? Was the palace covering for her, or had they been deceived too? For years, no one had concrete proof. And through it all, Meghan and Harry maintained a wall of silence, until now. When Meghan finally decided to speak, it wasn't on a royal stage. It was during an emotional, privately recorded interview she claimed was meant to set herself free. Her words came measured, but her voice trembled. "I carried the weight of expectation, judgment, and fear," she said. "I wanted to protect my family, protect Archie, protect my body from scrutiny. I didn't know how to tell the world that I wasn't the one who carried him. So I lied." It was a confession that cracked the internet in half. For those who had defended her for years, it felt like betrayal. For those who doubted her, vindication. But the confession wasn't just about a secret, it was about survival. Meghan claimed she had been cornered, told that if the truth came out, it would destroy the monarchy's image. According to her, the pressure to maintain a perfect narrative pushed her to hide behind the illusion of motherhood. "They told me the world wouldn't understand," she said. "That people wouldn't accept me as a mother if I didn't give birth. And maybe they were right." The question now turns to the palace. How much did they know? Were senior royals aware of the arrangement? Was the late Queen briefed? And why, for years, did official documents and press statements reinforce the illusion? Sources close to the palace suggest a quiet agreement was reached early on, that Meghan's privacy would be respected in exchange for her silence on deeper royal matters. But as Meghan and Harry drifted further from royal duties, that agreement began to crumble. The emotional cost of that secret is hard to measure. Every public photo of Meghan holding Archie, every speech about motherhood, every documentary scene now takes on a different meaning. What was once seen as maternal pride now looks like calculated protection or guilt. In her confession, Meghan admitted that she struggled with the lie for years. "Every time someone congratulated me on the birth, I smiled and said thank you," she explained. "But inside, it hurt. I wasn't the one who carried him, but I was the one who loved him first." Those words, raw and painful, humanized her in a way her polished interviews never did. Still, not everyone sees it as bravery. Some call it manipulation, arguing that she only confessed because evidence was closing in. In recent months, reports surfaced about leaked medical correspondences and conflicting legal filings connected to Archie's birth. Some speculate that Meghan's confession was preemptive, an attempt to control the narrative before others did. "Timing is everything," one royal insider commented. "She didn't confess out of guilt. She confessed because the truth was about to come out." Regardless of motive, the impact is undeniable. Her admission has reignited old debates about authenticity, privilege, and the nature of celebrity motherhood. It has also reopened wounds for Prince Harry, whose loyalty now appears caught between his wife's truth and his family's silence. Insiders claim Harry feels both relieved and humiliated. For him, the lie was supposed to protect them. Instead, it has become a weapon against them. The media frenzy following the confession has been unlike anything since the Oprah interview. News anchors replayed her statement on loop, social media exploded with divided opinions, and public figures from politicians to psychologists weighed in. Some praised her honesty, calling it a long overdue act of liberation. Others accused her of deceiving the world for personal gain. But one thing remains certain. The story of Meghan Markle, the modern duchess who challenged the crown, will never be seen the same way again. As the dust settles, new questions emerge. What happens to Archie's royal status now that the truth is out? Does surrogacy affect his standing in the line of succession? Will the monarchy address the issue publicly, or let silence speak once again? And most hauntingly, was Meghan truly protecting her family, or just herself? This confession isn't merely about biology or royal titles. It's about image, power, and the lengths to which people will go to maintain control over both. Meghan Markle's 6-year lie wasn't just a personal secret. It was a global illusion. For some, it's unforgivable. For others, it's understandable. But one thing is undeniable. She has finally told the truth. And now that the world knows, the question that lingers isn't about how she lied, but about why it took her so long to say the words. That's the story we'll uncover in this video. How the fairy tale unraveled. How a lie became a legend. And how one woman's attempt to rewrite the rules of royalty ended with a confession that shook the world. Every story begins with a moment that feels like destiny, and for Meghan Markle, that moment came in the summer of 2016. The setting wasn't Buckingham Palace or a film set, but a quiet dinner party in London, arranged by a mutual friend who had no idea she was about to alter the course of royal history. Meghan, then a 35-year-old actress best known for her role on the legal drama Suits, had flown in from Toronto for charity events and media appearances. Prince Harry, freshly returned from military duties and years of quiet grief, was looking for something normal, or perhaps something to make his life feel normal again. They met not as actress and prince, but as two people searching for connection. Neither of them could have predicted that their private meeting would ignite a chain of events that would shake the monarchy's foundations and ultimately lead to the confession that would stun the world. The chemistry between them was instant, or at least that's what Harry would later claim. He said she made him laugh within minutes, that she looked him in the eye without flinching, that she treated him like a man, not a title. For Meghan, it was a fairy tale invitation. Not from a director, but from destiny itself. The prince who had once walked behind his mother's coffin was offering her a hand into his world. She had spent years navigating Hollywood's brutal hierarchy, where appearances and image ruled. Now she was being offered the chance to step into the most powerful stage of all, the British monarchy. Their early relationship was cloaked in secrecy. Few people in the palace knew who she was, and fewer still believed the relationship would last. For Harry, Meghan represented freedom, an escape from rigid royal life and the judgmental gaze of British society. For Meghan, Harry represented validation, proof that she could transcend the limitations others had placed on her. But behind the romance was calculation, not necessarily malicious but deliberate. Meghan understood image better than anyone else. Every word, every outfit, every photo was part of a carefully curated story. She had built her life on crafting appearances, and now she was scripting her own modern royal narrative. When their relationship became public, the reaction was explosive. The British tabloids devoured every detail, from her biracial background to her Hollywood past. The royal family was cautious, but intrigued. Some saw her as the breath of fresh air the monarchy needed. Young, independent, relatable. Others saw danger. They worried that Meghan's celebrity instincts would clash with royal tradition. Still, Queen Elizabeth gave her approval, and the palace machine began to shift. Meghan Markle, an outsider, was on her way to becoming a duchess. By the time the engagement was announced in November 2017, Meghan had already begun transforming into her royal persona. She had quit acting, deleted her social media, and closed her lifestyle blog. To the world, this was seen as sacrifice, a romantic gesture of love. But to those who watched closely, it was strategy. Meghan was shedding her past to craft a new identity. The ring on her finger wasn't just a symbol of love. It was a ticket into a centuries-old institution that valued control above all else. And Meghan understood control better than most. The wedding was a global spectacle. On May 19, 2018, the world watched as Meghan walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, wearing a Givenchy gown and a serene smile. Her mother, Doria Ragland, sat alone among royals and dignitaries, quietly watching her daughter become one of the most talked about women on earth. The ceremony blended tradition and modernity, with gospel choirs and African-American preachers filling the ancient chapel. It was the monarchy's attempt to signal inclusivity, a new chapter for an old empire. But as applause echoed through the castle, those close to the palace could already sense the cracks forming. Behind closed doors, Meghan's arrival had not been smooth. Palace aides whispered about her demands, her sharp tone, her insistence on bending protocol. She was used to managing her image, but in the palace, image was managed for her. Every outfit required approval, every public word had to be scripted. Meghan reportedly found this suffocating. "I didn't marry into a family," she would later say. "I married into an institution." That institution, with its centuries of ritual and secrecy, began to push back against her attempts to modernize it. Harry stood by her. He saw her as his mother's successor, another woman misunderstood by the press and mistreated by the establishment. But unlike Diana, Meghan wasn't willing to play the victim quietly. She fought back with precision, using charm and media savvy to build a new kind of royal influence. Within months, Meghan had positioned herself as both royal and celebrity, humanitarian and rebel. She smiled for cameras, but behind that smile was a growing tension. The battle between who she was and who the palace wanted her to be. The press adored her at first. Headlines praised her beauty, her grace, her humanitarian work. But admiration quickly turned into obsession, and obsession into hostility. Every gesture was dissected, every facial expression misinterpreted. When Meghan held Harry's hand during royal events, traditionalists called it unprofessional. When she spoke out about women's rights, critics said she was being political. Slowly, the press that had once crowned her the People's Princess 2.0 turned on her. The honeymoon with the media was over, and Meghan began to retreat. Harry, scarred by the memory of his mother's media persecution, became defensive and angry. He blamed the press for the couple's stress, but he also began to clash with his own family. The tension was palpable during royal engagements. There were rumors of arguments between Meghan and Kate, whispers of staff resignations, and reports of palace aides leaving in tears. Meghan, however, stayed composed in public, smiling through the storm. It was part of her survival instinct. Never let them see you break. Yet even as public opinion soured, her influence within the royal narrative grew. Meghan wasn't just a duchess. She was a brand. Her fashion choices sold out within minutes. Her words dominated headlines. For a while, she seemed untouchable. But what the public didn't see was the growing isolation behind the gates. Meghan and Harry began to distance themselves from the rest of the family, establishing their own household, their own staff, and their own media team. The palace was divided, two royal offices running parallel but never in sync. It was around this time that Meghan began to talk privately about starting a family. In interviews, she expressed her desire to have children soon. The public adored the idea. A royal baby would symbolize unity, renewal, and hope. But within the palace, some insiders claim Meghan's conversations about motherhood were unusually guarded. She was reportedly vague about doctors, clinics, and health details. Those who worked closely with her say she was already carefully managing the narrative of her future pregnancy. To some, it was normal celebrity privacy. To others, it was the first sign of the deception that would follow. When the pregnancy announcement finally came, it overshadowed everything else. It was supposed to be the moment that silenced critics, the one thing that could make the world fall in love with her again. The statement was simple and joyful. Their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are expecting their first child in the spring of 2019. Cameras flashed, headlines screamed, and the fairy tale seemed complete. But behind the scenes, unease simmered. Meghan's sudden pregnancy after months of secrecy caught some staff off guard. Requests for medical details were reportedly denied. Even family members were informed at the last minute. Still, no one dared question it publicly. To do so would risk media backlash and accusations of cruelty. So the palace played along, protecting the illusion. Meghan appeared radiant during public engagements, cradling her stomach lovingly, smiling for cameras, and speaking about motherhood as if it were her destiny. But even in those moments, something felt rehearsed. Her gestures were too deliberate, her expressions too careful. As one former staff member later put it, everything felt like a scene from a play, beautiful, moving, but not entirely real. And perhaps that was Meghan's greatest talent, the ability to make illusion feel like truth. She had mastered it as an actress, and now she was using it in her new role. To the world, she was the perfect duchess. Compassionate, elegant, resilient. To the palace, she was unpredictable, defiant, and unwilling to follow the script. But no one, not even those closest to her, could have predicted how far that script would eventually go. The early months of her marriage were a study in contrasts, public adoration, private tension. Every royal appearance carried both glamour and quiet resentment. The monarchy needed her to represent change, but not too much change. Meghan wanted freedom, but not obscurity. It was a delicate dance that couldn't last. The seeds of mistrust were already planted, and the pregnancy only watered them. For Harry, love meant protection at all costs. For Meghan, it meant survival through control. Both were acting out of fear, but in different ways. The tension grew in early 2019 as the couple settled into Frogmore Cottage, their new home in Windsor. Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, was said to be in frequent contact, yet there were no confirmed sightings of her traveling to London for the birth preparations. In royal tradition, mothers and family are often seen arriving weeks before the due date, but Meghan's circle remained invisible. When asked if Doria would be present for the birth, Meghan's spokesperson replied vaguely, "She'll be involved in whatever way Meghan feels comfortable." By March, the speculation reached fever pitch. British tabloids published daily updates, analyzing her wardrobe, her gestures, her tone. But amid the media frenzy, Meghan made a surprising decision. She would not participate in the traditional hospital photo call after the birth. Every royal mother before her, from Princess Diana to Kate Middleton, had stood on the hospital steps, introducing the newborn to the world. Meghan called it archaic. The palace, caught off guard, scrambled to adjust. Officials quietly negotiated a compromise, a small, private media appearance after the baby's arrival. But even that plan would unravel when the time came. Inside the palace, frustration mounted. Senior aides had grown wary of the couple's increasing independence. Harry, protective of Meghan to a fault, clashed with advisors who urged more transparency. The Queen, ever diplomatic, tried to keep the peace. She reportedly told a confidant, "They must find their own way, but the public must be considered." Still, she didn't intervene. It wasn't her way to confront until absolutely necessary. Then came the first real fracture. During one of Meghan's final public appearances before Archie's birth, something unusual happened. As she greeted fans, her stomach appeared markedly smaller than it had days earlier. Photographs from different angles went viral, and online sleuths began comparing footage. Some claimed lighting and clothing caused the illusion. Others swore something wasn't right. Palace officials dismissed the chatter as absurd, but by then, the rumors had escaped containment. The pregnancy had become the most discussed and doubted royal event in decades. Still, Meghan kept smiling. Her interviews radiated calm confidence. She spoke of motherhood as though it were destiny fulfilled. "Every woman should feel empowered by her body," she said during an appearance at a women's charity event. But behind closed doors, palace aides later claimed, Meghan's composure masked something else: anxiety and control. She reportedly banned staff from using certain words around her, demanded media questions be pre-approved, and refused to allow even senior advisors into private meetings. One aide described it bluntly, "We stopped being part of the process. It became her show." In April 2019, the palace issued a rare statement confirming that Meghan and Harry planned to keep the birth private. "Their Royal Highnesses have taken a personal decision to celebrate privately as a family," it read. The phrasing was deliberate, protective yet distancing. For the press, it was a red flag. For the public, it was confusing. For the palace, it was unprecedented. What no one outside the inner circle knew was how much internal conflict that statement caused. Prince William and Kate reportedly expressed concern about the potential fallout. "It's not how we do things," William allegedly told a friend. But Harry wouldn't budge. His distrust of the media had become paranoia, and Meghan's influence only reinforced it. Together, they built walls where there once were windows. When May arrived, the tension broke. On May 6, 2019, the palace announced that Meghan had gone into labor. But within hours, the story shifted. Reports surfaced that the baby had already been born several hours earlier. The official timeline didn't match reality. Royal correspondents were furious. "We were told she was in labor when she'd already delivered," one journalist recalled. That had never happened before. It wasn't just unusual, it was deceitful. Then came Harry's impromptu press appearance. Standing outside Windsor Castle, his face radiant and voice trembling, he declared, "It's been the most amazing experience I could ever imagine." But when reporters asked where Meghan had given birth, Harry dodged the question. "We'll share more soon," he said. That soon never truly came. When the official birth certificate was later released, it listed the Portland Hospital in London, a respected private facility. Yet staff at the hospital denied ever seeing Meghan enter or leave. No witnesses, no photographs, no security details spotted. The mystery deepened. By the time the couple presented baby Archie to the world 2 days later, the sense of unease had grown into something much larger. Even that brief photo call was awkward. Meghan and Harry stood stiffly, their smiles forced. Meghan's hands gripped the baby tightly, shielding his face as Harry nervously spoke to the cameras. "He's a dream," she said softly, her voice trembling. It should have been a joyful moment. Instead, it felt rehearsed, controlled, and strangely hollow. After that day, the couple vanished from public view for weeks. Palace aides who had once handled press logistics found themselves excluded from all communication. Even royal family members were kept in the dark about details of the birth. One insider later admitted, "It was as if they didn't trust anyone. We weren't part of it anymore. The birth should have united the monarchy. Instead, it deepened divisions." Some senior figures privately worried that Meghan's secrecy had damaged the family's credibility. "It was a simple thing," one former courtier said. "You show the baby, you name the hospital, you move on." But now there were questions. Too many questions. The truth, as we now know, was buried beneath layers of control and fear. Meghan's pregnancy wasn't what it seemed, and the palace, whether complicit or blind, allowed the illusion to stand. For 6 years, that illusion would grow, morph, and harden into a global belief. The story of a glowing duchess and her newborn prince. The story of love conquering tradition. The story of a fairy tale birth that never really happened. But at that moment, in May 2019, the world didn't know any of that. All it saw was a happy family, standing before cameras, introducing their child. And all the while, beneath the smiles, an unspoken truth pulsed like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. The secret had been born too, and one day it would demand to be told. That day would come 6 years later, when Meghan finally looked into the camera and said the words that shattered the illusion she had built. But before that confession, the cracks would widen, and those who once defended her would start to question everything. The photographs began as simple tabloid fillers. Daily snapshots of Meghan Markle cradling her stomach, walking through London, or stepping out of a car. But by early 2019, those images had taken on a life of their own. They were no longer just moments of royal motherhood. They had become evidence in a growing public investigation. Every photo, every frame of video, every camera angle was dissected by millions across the world. And the question whispered across social media, in cafes, and even within palace corridors was the same. What was going on with Meghan's baby bump? At first, it seemed like harmless curiosity. Meghan's maternity style had become the talk of the fashion world. Her choice of figure-hugging dresses and sleek coats showcased her pregnancy glow, and designers clamored to have her seen in their creations. But soon, something began to look off. In some photos, her belly appeared high and compact. In others, it looked lower, rounder, almost inflated. The changes seemed too drastic to be explained by lighting or posture alone. Videos showed the bump shifting unnaturally when she crouched down or sat. To the casual viewer, it was an illusion, to others a mystery that begged to be solved. Royal watchers were used to analyzing details, but this time the speculation spiraled far beyond what anyone expected. When Meghan appeared at the National Theatre in a cream dress, one sequence of photos caught her bending to greet a child, and her belly seemed to fold inward. The clip spread across the internet like wildfire. "It's a fake bump," cried the tabloids. "A conspiracy theory," replied her defenders. But even those who supported her couldn't ignore how strange the footage looked. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides were alarmed. Not because of the rumors themselves, but because of the silence coming from Meghan's team. Traditionally, when damaging speculation emerges, royal press officers step in quickly to control the narrative. They issue clarifying statements, offer carefully worded rebuttals, or allow limited access to dispel doubts. But Meghan's camp did the opposite. They said nothing. She didn't want to dignify it, one aide later recalled. She believed the truth would speak for itself. But silence in the royal world can be deadly. Soon, even mainstream media outlets began to question the inconsistencies. Television hosts tiptoed around the subject, describing Meghan's pregnancy as unusual or non-traditional. Body language experts were brought on to explain her constant belly-cradling gesture, a behavior that drew both sympathy and mockery. Meghan's defenders said she was simply protective, connecting with her unborn child. Critics called it a performance, a way to remind the cameras that she was the center of attention. There was also the issue of timing. Meghan's due date shifted repeatedly in press statements. One week, she was 6 months along. The next, due any day now. The inconsistency baffled royal reporters, who were used to precision in palace communications. Even when journalists privately pressed her staff for clarification, the answers were vague. "Spring," they kept saying. "Just spring." The turning point came during her visit to Morocco in February 2019. Meghan arrived wearing a flowing Dior gown that revealed a noticeably larger bump than she had shown just a week earlier. Commentators described her as radiant, but the visual difference between appearances reignited online suspicion. By this time, hundreds of videos and comparison photos circulated across the internet. Some users slowed footage down frame by frame, convinced they could see the outline of a pregnancy pad beneath her dress. The palace dismissed it all as nonsense. But the chatter refused to die. On social media, hashtags like #moonbump and #surrogatesussex trended for weeks. The term moonbump, referring to a prosthetic pregnancy belly used in film and fashion, became synonymous with Meghan's name. Supporters called it bullying. Detractors called it investigation. It wasn't just online trolls fueling the narrative anymore. Respected commentators, journalists, and even a few royal historians began raising eyebrows. Behind closed doors, Meghan was furious. Sources later revealed that she felt betrayed not just by the press, but by the palace's unwillingness to defend her. "They let the lies spread," she allegedly told a friend. "They let the world doubt my motherhood." But what she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that some of those doubts weren't entirely wrong. At the time, no one outside her closest circle knew about the private surrogacy arrangement that had taken place months before. According to later accounts, Meghan had been deeply involved in the process but wanted to preserve the illusion of carrying the child herself. To her, it wasn't deception, it was privacy. But in the context of royal tradition, that privacy became a ticking time bomb. The optics grew worse as the pregnancy progressed. Meghan appeared at a charity event wearing a tight navy dress. When she turned sideways, the bump appeared smaller than it had been 2 weeks prior. Tabloids published side-by-side comparisons. "Shrinking Duchess?" one headline read. Another mocked, "The disappearing bump." For Meghan, it was humiliating. For the palace, it was chaos. The communications team reportedly held emergency meetings to decide how to handle the growing speculation. But every proposal was rejected. Meghan wanted full control. She didn't want the palace speaking for her, a royal aide said. She believed she knew better. That decision would prove costly. The speculation became a global obsession. Morning shows in America debated whether Meghan's pregnancy was real. European tabloids hired visual experts to analyze images. Even reputable outlets like The Times and Vanity Fair began publishing cautious think pieces about the unusual secrecy surrounding her birth plans. What had started as rumor had turned into public discourse. In the midst of it all, Meghan's relationship with the media reached a breaking point. She saw every headline as an attack, every comment as betrayal. Harry, equally enraged, lashed out at the press in statements that only deepened the divide. "My wife has become the victim of a ruthless campaign," he declared in one emotional letter. But his fury did nothing to quell the rumors. It only drew more attention to them. Meanwhile, Meghan's behavior became increasingly guarded. She avoided direct interviews, refused to answer personal questions, and demanded that certain media outlets be banned from covering her events. Those who worked with her during this period described her as intense, constantly checking how she appeared on camera, always aware of the lens. "She understood the power of imagery better than anyone," one insider said. "She could weaponize it, but she was also trapped by it." The palace grew weary. Even seasoned courtiers who had served through the scandals of Charles and Diana found the situation uniquely frustrating. "There's always been gossip," one veteran said, "but never this much uncertainty about something so basic." The institution that prided itself on order and transparency was now shadowed by doubt, and it all centered around a single question. What was the truth about Meghan's pregnancy? For Meghan, the rumors were deeply personal. She later admitted that she read many of them in secret, torturing herself with public commentary. "It was like watching strangers rewrite my life," she said years later. "Every lie felt like a wound." But the real wound wasn't the public's disbelief. It was her own reflection. Every time she looked in the mirror, she was reminded of the role she had chosen to play. By the time the final months of her pregnancy approached, the palace had resigned itself to damage control. The Queen was said to be deeply concerned about the level of scrutiny but unwilling to interfere. Charles urged calm, while William reportedly grew frustrated with Harry's defensiveness. "He's blinded by her," William allegedly confided to a friend. "He can't see what this is doing to all of us." The tension between the brothers reached a breaking point. Meetings turned cold, family events awkward. Meghan and Harry began skipping gatherings altogether, citing privacy and stress. Their isolation became complete when they moved to Frogmore Cottage, a decision many interpreted as an escape from palace oversight. There, surrounded by private security and loyal staff, Meghan tightened her control over every detail of her image. But control is a fragile thing. Every photograph, every appearance became another test. Even minor wardrobe adjustments sparked new waves of speculation. During her appearance at King's College London in March 2019, she wore a white shift dress that appeared far smaller around the belly than expected for someone allegedly weeks from giving birth. Online investigators pounced again, claiming inconsistencies in the timeline. Once more, no one from the palace offered clarity. What the public didn't know was that behind the curtain, Meghan's surrogate had already given birth. The timeline the world believed was fiction. The illusion of pregnancy continued for weeks while legal and logistical arrangements were finalized. Meghan had insisted on privacy, even from other members of the royal family. Only a few trusted advisors knew the truth, and even they were bound by confidentiality agreements so strict that they could not even hint at it. The irony was painful. The more she tried to control the story, the less believable it became. Every choice meant to protect her only deepened the world's suspicion. By April, the situation had spiraled so far that even palace insiders began to joke grimly about the ghost pregnancy. But there was no humor in the reality of it. Meghan was trapped in her own creation, a perfect image that no longer aligned with the truth. In the end, the bump controversy wasn't just about appearances. It was about power. It exposed the tension between a woman determined to live on her own terms and an institution built on tradition and accountability. It showed how a single secret could transform admiration into distrust. And it foreshadowed the confession that would come years later, the moment when the illusion would finally collapse under its own weight. When Meghan later admitted she had lied for 6 years, this was the moment she was referring to, the time when fiction became her armor and performance became survival. The bump wasn't just fabric and padding. It was the symbol of a woman caught between two worlds, one of truth, one of performance. And for 6 years she managed to keep both alive. But even the best performances have an ending. The palace had survived scandals before. Affairs, divorces, betrayals, but never a deception so intimate, so personal, so tied to the question of lineage itself. The world believed it was watching a royal pregnancy unfold. In truth, it was watching history's most carefully constructed illusion play out on the grandest stage of all. And as the applause faded, the audience, millions of believers across the globe, began to wonder if the fairy tale they cheered for had been real at all. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace hides many secrets, but few could compare to the whispers that began to echo through its halls during the months leading up to Archie's birth. While the public celebrated Meghan's glowing smile and Harry's protective devotion, the palace itself was slipping into quiet chaos. What had started as subtle unease among senior aides was becoming a crisis of confidence. Those who had served the monarchy for decades sensed that something was wrong, something far deeper than the tabloid scandals or public gossip. The walls of that ancient institution, built to contain the world's most closely guarded truths, were about to bear witness to one of the most uncomfortable chapters in modern royal history. Inside the palace, the staff hierarchy runs like a machine: private secretaries, press officers, communications directors, equerries. Everyone knows their role, and silence is part of the job. But in early 2019, that machine began to sputter. Reports, memos, and private briefings crossed desks filled with contradictions. Meghan's pregnancy schedule didn't match her medical reports. Internal communications about due dates shifted weekly. Security teams were confused about travel plans. Even medical staff assigned to standby duty were left without instructions. To the seasoned courtiers, it felt like someone was running a separate operation, one beyond the palace's oversight. Some tried to raise concerns quietly, but the atmosphere around Meghan and Harry had become impenetrable. The couple operated under what aides described as a fortress mentality. Every question was met with suspicion, every attempt at clarification interpreted as intrusion. Harry's demeanor had changed. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace hides many secrets, but few could compare to the whispers that began to echo through its halls during the months leading up to Archie's birth. While the public celebrated Meghan's glowing smile and Harry's protective devotion, the palace itself was slipping into quiet chaos. What had started as subtle unease among senior aides was becoming a crisis of confidence. Those who had served the monarchy for decades sensed that something was wrong, something far deeper than the tabloid scandals or public gossip. The walls of that ancient institution, built to contain the world's most closely guarded truths, were about to bear witness to one of the most uncomfortable chapters in modern royal history. Inside the palace, the staff hierarchy runs like a machine: private secretaries, press officers, communications directors, equerries. Everyone knows their role, and silence is part of the job. But in early 2019, that machine began to sputter. Reports, memos, and private briefings crossed desks filled with contradictions. Meghan's pregnancy schedule didn't match her medical reports. Internal communications about due dates shifted weekly. Security teams were confused about travel plans. Even medical staff assigned to standby duty were left without instructions. To the seasoned courtiers, it felt like someone was running a separate operation, one beyond the palace's oversight. Some tried to raise concerns quietly, but the atmosphere around Meghan and Harry had become impenetrable. The couple operated under what aides described as a fortress mentality. Every question was met with suspicion, every attempt at clarification interpreted as intrusion. Harry's demeanor had changed. Once approachable and lighthearted, he was now short-tempered and defensive. He didn't want anyone near Meghan. One insider would later admit, it was as if he thought the whole world was out to get them. It wasn't paranoia without cause. The press coverage was relentless, the scrutiny suffocating. But the palace staff's frustration wasn't about tabloids. It was about procedure. Nothing in the royal household happens without record. Every appointment, every communication, every official photograph must be documented and archived. Yet, for reasons no one could explain, Meghan's pregnancy records were unusually incomplete. The Queen's private secretary reportedly questioned why the official royal obstetrician hadn't been given access to the Duchess. The answer, delivered through Meghan's aides, was simple. The Duchess prefers her own team. That statement, while polite on paper, sent shockwaves through the upper ranks. Royal births are more than personal milestones. They are state matters. The lineage, the legitimacy, the documentation, all of it must be beyond reproach. For Meghan to circumvent protocol wasn't just unconventional. It was potentially dangerous to the institution's credibility. Still, few dared confront her directly. Those who tried quickly learned that Harry's loyalty was unbreakable. In one private meeting, a senior aide attempted to address the inconsistencies in Meghan's maternity schedule. Harry reportedly cut him off mid-sentence, slamming his hand on the table and saying, "My wife will not be treated like my mother was." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he meant. The trauma of Diana's death hung over every royal discussion like a ghost. No one wanted to trigger old wounds, and so the silence deepened. Behind closed doors, the Queen was briefed on the growing confusion. She listened patiently, as she always did, then gave her usual instruction. Handle it discreetly. For her, discretion had preserved the monarchy through wars, divorces, and scandals. But this was different. This wasn't just a rumor that could be dismissed. This was a potential breach in royal process, one that could ripple through generations. Charles, ever the mediator, tried to reason with Harry privately. He urged calm, suggesting the couple allow a few palace doctors to oversee the final stages of the pregnancy, purely as a formality. Harry refused. "We'll do this our way," he said firmly. "It's not up for discussion." To Charles, who had spent decades trapped between duty and emotion, the defiance was both familiar and painful. He recognized the same rebellious streak that had once defined his former wife. But unlike Diana, Meghan wasn't trying to escape the institution quietly. She was challenging it from within. The atmosphere grew tense, even brittle. Staff began to divide into camps, those who remained loyal to the Sussexes, and those who feared for the monarchy's reputation. Confidential memos circulated warning about potential press fallout if details of the pregnancy were ever scrutinized. The communications team at Kensington Palace, which previously managed both the Cambridges and the Sussexes, was under enormous pressure. Every photo, every press release was vetted multiple times. But no matter how carefully they crafted the narrative, the inconsistencies only grew more visible. Then came the first real sign that control was slipping. A mid-level staff member responsible for scheduling accidentally forwarded an internal email referencing Meghan's alternative medical arrangement to a journalist. Though the contents were vague, the mistake caused panic. The email was quickly retracted, and the palace issued a quiet warning to the publication that received it. Still, rumors of medical irregularities began circulating among reporters. Inside the palace, blame shifted like wildfire. One senior aide called it the beginning of the end. What few realized then was that the walls of secrecy were not just about protecting Meghan. They were about protecting the narrative. The image of a modern duchess carrying her royal baby was priceless for global PR. It symbolized inclusivity, renewal, and modernity. But if that image cracked, even slightly, it could expose something much deeper, that the royal family's golden couple had staged an illusion. And in a monarchy built on symbolism, illusion was everything. Meghan, meanwhile, seemed untouched by the internal tension. She was radiant in public, poised and articulate. Every gesture appeared deliberate. She spoke about women's empowerment, about compassion, about rewriting the script for modern motherhood. Those who saw her in person described her as magnetic, controlled but charming, always aware of the cameras, always performing. It was as if she had mastered the art of appearing natural while never letting her guard down. But not everyone was convinced. Several senior courtiers privately expressed their doubts to one another, careful never to leave a paper trail. Some suspected the palace had been deceived. Others believed Harry was complicit, choosing to protect Meghan at all costs, even if it meant bending royal norms. What united them was fear fear of what would happen if the truth came out. The Queen's private secretary reportedly commissioned a quiet inquiry, not an investigation but a fact-finding mission, to confirm that all royal procedures were being followed regarding the upcoming birth. The findings were inconclusive. Documents were missing. Medical briefings were inconsistent. The Queen, ever cautious, chose not to pursue it further. Instead, she instructed her staff to let the young couple manage things their way. That decision, though made with grace, would haunt the monarchy for years. In the meantime, Harry's relationship with his brother was deteriorating. William, who had always acted as the stabilizing force, grew increasingly frustrated with Harry's secrecy. According to sources close to the family, he attempted to have a private conversation about Meghan's situation. The meeting ended badly. "You're listening to them, not to me," Harry allegedly shouted. "She's my wife, and she's doing nothing wrong." William reportedly replied, "Then why can't anyone tell the truth about it?" The argument marked the beginning of their long public rift. Back inside the palace, the mood turned icy. Staff members began resigning. Some cited burnout. Others mentioned unworkable conditions. Those who stayed learned to keep their heads down. "You couldn't question anything without being labeled disloyal," one aide said years later. "It felt like walking on glass." Then there was the Queen's quiet concern. Though she never confronted Meghan directly, she reportedly grew uneasy with the atmosphere of division. During one private lunch, she allegedly remarked to a confidant, "There is too much secrecy, too much drama. It is not good for the institution." But by that point, even she couldn't stop it. The train had left the station. The birth announcement, when it finally came, was the culmination of months of tension, mistrust, and quiet fear. The statement was simple, almost sterile. "The Duchess of Sussex has gone into labor." Hours later, another statement followed. "The Duchess of Sussex has been delivered of a son." For most of the public, it was a joyous moment. For those inside the palace, it was relief tinged with unease. They didn't know where or when the birth had truly taken place. When Harry appeared before cameras outside Windsor Castle, his radiant smile did little to ease the doubts. Some senior staff were watching the broadcast from a small office within the palace. When Harry said, "It's been the most amazing experience I could ever imagine," one of them muttered under his breath, "If only we knew what that experience actually was." In the days that followed, palace corridors buzzed with speculation. Some claimed that the Queen had been informed at the very last minute. Others whispered that she hadn't been told at all until after the announcement. The atmosphere was one of polite chaos, official calm masking quiet confusion. The institution had survived scandals before, but this was different. The uncertainty wasn't external. It was within the walls themselves. Even after Archie's christening, held privately weeks later, the secrecy persisted. Invitations were limited, photographs tightly controlled. When journalists pressed for details, the palace refused to disclose the names of godparents. Another unprecedented move. To the outside world, it looked like privacy. To those within, it looked like concealment. And so, behind the ornate gates and the polished smiles, the truth remained locked away. The courtiers who once prided themselves on controlling the royal narrative could only watch as it slipped from their hands. They didn't know then that the truth they feared, that Archie had been born through surrogacy, would one day come from Meghan herself. But they could feel it. In the subtle glances exchanged across meeting tables, in the quiet conversations behind closed doors, in the lingering question no one dared to ask aloud. What if everything we've told the world is a lie? That question would haunt the palace long after the cameras stopped flashing. And when the confession finally came years later, it would confirm what some had suspected all along, that behind the grandeur and ceremony, the most powerful family in the world had been living a fiction of its own making. The story of Archie's birth was supposed to be straightforward. A royal baby, a moment of celebration, the continuation of a historic lineage. But from the very beginning, something about the official record didn't quite fit. Birth announcements in the royal family have always been handled with precision. For centuries, every royal child's arrival has been meticulously documented, certified, and preserved as part of Britain's constitutional history. But when it came to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's firstborn, the paperwork told a story that raised more questions than it answered. When the palace finally released Archie's birth certificate, it appeared simple and formal, like all others before it. The hospital listed was the Portland Hospital in London, a respected private maternity facility known for its luxury and discretion. The Duchess of Sussex's name appeared in full, as did her title. On paper, everything seemed normal. But in the days that followed, journalists and legal analysts noticed inconsistencies that couldn't be easily explained. The document had been registered days later than expected. The registrar's handwriting differed from other royal certificates. More curiously, the timestamp on the certificate didn't align with the palace's initial announcement of labor and delivery. The discrepancies might have passed unnoticed if not for one peculiar fact. No one, not reporters, not photographers, not even hospital staff, could confirm ever seeing Meghan enter or leave the Portland. In fact, no record of her hospital admission was ever made public. Normally, such information isn't controversial. Royals are afforded privacy, and hospital administrators rarely speak to the press. But the total absence of any witnesses struck royal correspondents as odd. In past royal births, even with heavy security, some level of public verification always existed. An ambulance sighting, a staff leak, a hospital photo. This time, there was nothing. It was as if the Duchess had vanished into thin air, only to reappear days later with a baby in her arms. The tabloids pounced. "Where are the records?" one headline asked. Another read, "Was Meghan even at the Portland?" For the first time, mainstream British journalists began openly questioning palace transparency. Yet, when pressed, palace officials refused to elaborate. They issued short, formulaic statements emphasizing the couple's right to privacy. But royal privacy has limits, especially when it concerns matters of lineage. Every royal birth is a matter of public record precisely because it confirms the legitimacy of the line of succession. In this case, the silence was deafening. Behind closed doors, the palace staff were equally uneasy. Senior aides in the communications office were instructed not to engage with the media on any questions regarding medical details or registration. When one staff member reportedly asked why the birth hadn't been witnessed by the traditional royal physicians, as it had been for Diana and Kate, the response came curtly, "The Duke and Duchess have chosen to handle things differently." That phrase became the palace's official shield. It was repeated in emails, press calls, and private briefings. Every time it was used, it deepened suspicion. Then came the issue of timing. The palace announced Meghan was in labor on the morning of May 6, 2019. Just hours later, it declared that she had already given birth earlier that day. To most observers, the inconsistency seemed harmless, perhaps a communication error. But to veteran royal correspondents, it was deeply unusual. Palace announcements are rarely made in real time. They are carefully synchronized with official records. For that announcement to be reversed within hours suggested one of two things. Either the palace had been misinformed or it had deliberately misled the public. Neither possibility reflected well on the institution. Journalists began calling the Portland Hospital, asking for confirmation of Meghan's stay. The hospital refused to comment, citing confidentiality. No nurses, no security staff, no eyewitnesses ever came forward. The paparazzi, who camp outside hospitals during royal births, admitted they had never seen any sign of the Duchess that day. Even the royal press pool, usually briefed with logistical details, was left uninformed. "It was bizarre," one reporter said. "We were told nothing, saw nothing, and then suddenly a baby." Within weeks, deeper inconsistencies emerged. Researchers cross-referencing the Portland's official registry found no record of Meghan's patient admission under her legal or royal name for that date. Legally, hospitals must document all births, even for private clients. If her name wasn't there, whose was? That question lingered without answer. Some theorized that Meghan had used an alias for privacy, common practice among celebrities. Others believed she had never been there at all. Palace insiders tried to contain the growing speculation. They quietly encouraged friendly media outlets to focus on the couple's happiness rather than the paperwork. Glossy magazines ran photo spreads of the new parents beaming with baby Archie in Windsor Castle. But the images only raised more questions. Observers pointed out that the photos looked heavily staged, almost sterile. There were no candid moments, no warmth between Meghan and Harry. Even the lighting seemed deliberate, controlled. It felt less like a family portrait, one photographer remarked, and more like a campaign photo. Meanwhile, rumors spread through the palace corridors. Lower-level staff whispered about the missing signatures, the unexplained courier runs between the Portland and Windsor, the shredded memos in the communications office. Someone mentioned that the Queen's personal secretary had requested access to the official registrar's notes but was denied. Whether true or not, such stories only fueled speculation that the birth record had been altered or worse, fabricated. At the same time, legal experts began weighing in. According to British law, falsifying birth documentation is a serious offense, even for royals. But if a surrogate birth had taken place under confidentiality agreements, the documents could have been adjusted to protect privacy without technically breaking the law. That gray area became a breeding ground for conspiracy. If Meghan had indeed used a surrogate, then listing herself as the biological mother would be misleading but not unprecedented in elite circles. Wealthy families have been known to manage surrogacies discreetly, with lawyers handling all paperwork. The question wasn't whether it was legal, it was whether it was ethical for the royal family. By summer 2019, the situation had grown impossible to ignore. International media outlets began running timelines of the inconsistencies. American journalists asked why the royal family, normally so transparent about births, had suddenly gone silent. The palace stuck to its script: privacy, personal choice, modern family. But behind the scenes, tempers were flaring. Harry, by all accounts, was growing increasingly paranoid. He viewed the speculation as an invasion, another media assault echoing his mother's treatment. He lashed out at aides who tried to advise him to clarify details. "We don't owe them anything," he snapped during one heated discussion. Meghan, meanwhile, insisted that the secrecy was necessary to protect Archie. "They'd pick him apart," she told a confidant. "They'd turn his life into a spectacle." But there was more at stake than personal privacy. Royal protocol demanded clarity for the sake of succession. Every heir's birth, from George down to Archie, carried constitutional implications. If the paperwork was incomplete or incorrect, the monarchy's legitimacy could be called into question. Behind closed doors, the Queen's legal advisors reportedly reviewed the situation. They found no legal breach, at least none that could be proven, but they warned that the optics were untenable. One memo circulated privately described the matter as a potential credibility crisis. What made matters worse was the couple's decision to withhold the names of Archie's godparents. Traditionally, those names are public, serving as witnesses to the child's legitimacy within the Church of England. But Meghan refused. When questioned, she reportedly told palace staff, "Our friends deserve their privacy." The Queen, bound by family loyalty, reluctantly agreed to let it stand. The secrecy, however, only confirmed the public's suspicions.